After my boyfriend vanished for an entire weekend, his friend called saying he was in a serious car crash and unconscious in the ICU. I spent days sobbing, leaving desperate voicemails and begging hospital staff to let me see him, only to find out it was all a twisted prank, and he had been laughing at my panicked messages the whole time with his friends. I never thought I would be writing something like this on Reddit, but here I am at 3 a.m, unable to sleep. My boyfriend Thomas, 26 male, and I, 23 female, have been together for 2.5 years. We met in college through mutual friends and began dating pretty quickly after that. He was studying business while I was finishing my psychology degree. Thomas comes from a family that enjoys practical jokes. His dad would conceal himself behind doors to startle his mom. His brother would cover the toilet seat with plastic wrap, and they all found it quite amusing. When I first started dating Thomas, he would play small pranks on me too. Nothing malicious, just things like affixing googly eyes to everything in my apartment, or changing my phone wallpaper to a picture of Nicolas Cage. I always laughed along because they were harmless, and he would always reveal the joke right away. I should mention that I have some issues with anxiety that began in high school. My parents went through a really messy divorce when I was 16, and my dad simply vanished from our lives completely. One day he was there, helping me with homework, and the next day he was gone. My mom discovered he had been having an affair and moved across the country with his new girlfriend. He never called or texted after that. This left me with some trust issues, and I get really anxious when people I care about suddenly become quiet or disappear without explanation. Thomas knew all about my dad and how it affected me. I told him early in our relationship because I wanted him to understand why I sometimes needed extra reassurance. He was always very good about responding to my text promptly and letting me know his plans. If he was going to be late, or if something unexpected arose, he would always call or send a quick message. This made me feel secure in our relationship. About 6 months ago, Thomas started a new job at a marketing firm downtown. The work was demanding, and he often had to stay late for client meetings. His new co-workers were all young men who enjoyed going out for drinks after work. Thomas began joining them more frequently, which I was fine with. I wanted him to have friends and unwind after work. The thing is, these guys were very fond of elaborate pranks and jokes. Thomas would come home with stories about how they convinced their boss that the office was haunted by moving things around when he wasn't looking, or how they informed new employees that there was a dress code requiring everyone to wear purple on Wednesdays. I thought some of it was funny, but some of their jokes seemed mean-spirited. 3 weeks ago, Thomas went out with his coworkers on a Friday night. This was typical, and I wasn't worried about it. He usually texted me around midnight to let me know he got home safely, especially if he had been drinking. That night, midnight passed without a text. I figured he was just having a good time and forgot to check his phone. I woke up Saturday morning and still hadn't heard from him. I sent a text asking if he made it home okay. No response. I called around noon and it went straight to voicemail. I started to get that familiar, anxious feeling in my stomach, but I tried to remain calm. Perhaps his phone died, or maybe he was extremely hungover and still sleeping. By Saturday evening, I was genuinely worried. I had called several times and sent multiple texts with no response. This was completely unlike Thomas. Even when he was busy or stressed, he would at least send a quick text to let me know he was alive. I considered calling his roommate Dave, but I didn't want to appear clingy or paranoid. Sunday morning arrived, and I still hadn't heard anything. I was pacing around my apartment and couldn't concentrate on anything. I kept checking my phone every few minutes, hoping to see a message from him. Around 10 in the morning, I finally decided to call Dave. Dave sounded unusual when he answered. His voice was different, more serious than usual. He told me that Thomas had been in a car accident Friday night on his way home from the bar. He said Thomas was in the hospital and had been unconscious since Saturday morning. Dave said the doctors weren't sure when he would wake up and that his family was flying in from out of state. I dropped my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely pick it up again. Dave was still speaking, but I couldn't process what he was saying. All I could think about was how Thomas might die, and the last thing I said to him was, "Have fun tonight," over text. We hadn't even said "I love you." I asked Dave which hospital Thomas was at so I could come see him. Dave said the family was limiting visitors, and that Thomas's mom specifically asked that I wait until he woke up, because seeing him with all the machines and tubes might be too upsetting for me. This seemed strange because Thomas's mom, Sarah, and I got along really well. She had always been welcoming and kind to me. I spent Sunday crying and calling the hospital, trying to get information. They wouldn't tell me anything because I wasn't family. I tried calling Thomas's mom, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I called his brother Tom, but same thing. I felt completely shut out and helpless. Sunday night I barely slept. I kept imagining Thomas alone in a hospital bed while I was sitting at home doing nothing. Monday morning, I decided I was going to the hospital regardless of what his family said. I looked up the visiting hours and planned to go right after work. I was getting ready to leave for the hospital Monday evening when someone knocked on my apartment door. I looked through the peephole and saw Thomas standing there, holding a bouquet of flowers and grinning like an idiot. I opened the door and just stared at him. He was wearing the same clothes from Friday night, and he looked tired, but he was definitely not in a hospital bed hooked up to machines. He walked into my apartment and said, "Surprise," then started laughing. He explained that the whole thing was a prank that he and his coworkers had planned. He said they wanted to see how long they could keep it going and how many people they could fool. Dave was in on it, which is why he sounded so serious on the phone. Thomas had been staying at his coworker's apartment all weekend, and they had been planning the big reveal. Thomas seemed genuinely surprised that I wasn't laughing along. He said he brought flowers to make up for worrying me and that he thought I would find the whole thing clever and funny. He kept saying it was just a joke, and that I should be happy he was okay instead of being upset. I asked him why he would do something like that. Knowing how I felt about people disappearing from my life, he said he didn't think I would take it so seriously, and that it was just supposed to be funny for a few hours, not the whole weekend. He said his coworkers kept encouraging him to keep it going because my reactions were so dramatic. He told me that he had been reading my texts and listening to my voicemails the whole time. He said some of them were really funny because I sounded so panicked. He even played a voicemail I had left on Saturday night where I was crying and telling him I loved him and begging him to wake up. His coworkers were laughing in the background. I couldn't speak for several minutes. Thomas kept trying to hug me and telling me to lighten up. He said pranks were just a part of who he was and that I needed to learn to take a joke. He said his family had always been like this, and it was no big deal. I asked him to leave my apartment. He seemed shocked and said he wasn't leaving until I stopped being dramatic about a harmless prank. He said he had gone to a lot of trouble to set up the surprise and bring me flowers, and that I was being ungrateful. I went into my bedroom and locked the door. Thomas stayed in my living room for about an hour, trying to get me to come out and talk to him. He kept saying I was overreacting and that he was sorry if I got worried, but it was just a joke. Eventually, he left, but not before shouting through the door that I was being ridiculous, and that his coworkers were right about me being too sensitive. That was 4 days ago, and I haven't spoken to Thomas since. He has called and texted multiple times, but I haven't responded. Some of his messages are apologies, but others are telling me I'm being childish and need to get over it. His roommate, Dave, texted me yesterday saying I should forgive Thomas because it was just supposed to be funny, and now Thomas feels bad about it. I keep going back and forth about whether I'm overreacting. Maybe it was just a prank that went too far. Maybe I'm being too sensitive, like Thomas said. But I can't stop thinking about how he listened to me crying and thought it was funny. I can't stop thinking about how he shared those voicemails with his coworkers, and they all laughed at me. I don't know what to do. A part of me wants to work things out because we had a good relationship before this happened. But another part of me feels like something fundamental has changed, and I don't know if I can trust him anymore. How do you come back from something like this? Update 1. I wasn't planning on updating this post, but so much has happened in the past few weeks that I needed to get it all out somewhere. Thank you to everyone who commented on my original post. Reading your responses helped me realize I wasn't crazy for being upset about what Thomas did. After I posted, I didn't hear from Thomas for about a week. I assumed he had finally gotten the message that I needed space. I was starting to feel a little better, and was even considering whether I should reach out to have a conversation about everything. Then Sarah, Thomas's mom, called me. She said she had been trying to reach Thomas for several days, and he wasn't returning her calls. She asked if we had gotten into an argument, or if something was wrong. I realized that Thomas had never told his family about the prank. I didn't know what to say at first. I didn't want to get Thomas in trouble with his family, but I also felt like Sarah deserved to know what her son had done. I ended up telling her everything. I explained about the fake car accident, about Dave lying to me, about how Thomas had been hiding at his coworker's place all weekend while I thought he was dying in a hospital. Sarah was quiet for a long time after I finished talking. Then she started asking me to repeat certain details, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. She asked me if I was sure this really happened and if maybe there had been some kind of misunderstanding. I told her I was certain and that Thomas had admitted the whole thing was a prank. Sarah apologized to me over and over again. She said she was horrified and ashamed of Thomas's behavior. She said she had raised him better than that and couldn't understand how he thought something like that would be funny. She promised she would talk to him and make sure he understood how wrong he had been. 2 days later, Thomas showed up at my apartment again. This time he looked angry instead of apologetic. He said his mom had called him screaming and crying about the prank. He said she was threatening to cut off his car insurance and stop helping him with his student loans. He said it was my fault for telling her about something that was between us. I told him that his mom had called me worried about him and that I wasn't going to lie to her. Thomas said I had no right to involve his family in our relationship problems. He said I was trying to turn everyone against him because I was still mad about a stupid joke. Then Thomas said something that I can't stop thinking about. He said his coworkers had warned him that I would probably overreact because I had daddy issues. He said they told him that girls with absent fathers always get too attached and create drama over nothing. He said maybe they were right, and maybe he should have listened to them. I asked him to leave again, but this time he refused. He said we needed to work this out, because he wasn't going to let me ruin his relationship with his family over a prank. He planted himself on my couch and said he wasn't leaving until I agreed to call his mom and tell her I had exaggerated everything. I went to my bedroom and called my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who lives next door. I told her my boyfriend was in my apartment and wouldn't leave and asked if she could come over. Mrs. Chen is in her 70s, but she doesn't tolerate nonsense from anyone. She came over immediately and told Thomas he needed to leave or she would call the police. Thomas finally left, but not before telling me that I was pathetic and that he was done trying to fix our relationship. He said I could explain to everyone why we broke up and that he hoped I was happy with myself. The next day, Sarah called me again. She said she had talked to Thomas and that he had admitted everything I told her was true. She said she was disappointed and embarrassed by his behavior. She also said she had talked to Dave and found out that he had been lying to her too when she called asking about Thomas that weekend. Sarah told me that Thomas had been bragging to his coworkers about how gullible I was and how easy it was to fool me. She said one of his coworkers felt bad about the whole thing and had told his girlfriend what they did. The girlfriend was horrified and told the coworker he needed to tell someone what really happened. That's how Sarah found out about all the details Thomas had left out when she confronted him. I found out that Thomas had been showing his coworkers the texts I sent while I thought he was in the hospital. He had been reading them out loud, and they were all laughing about how desperate and pathetic I sounded. They made jokes about how I was probably crying myself to sleep and how I was blowing up his phone like a crazy person. Sarah said she was considering making Thomas pay back all the money she had given him for his car and his student loans. She said she didn't raise him to treat people that way and that she was ashamed to be his mother. She asked me if there was anything she could do to make up for what he had done. I told Sarah that none of this was her fault and that she didn't need to do anything. I said I appreciated her calling me and being honest about what she found out. Sarah said she hoped I would find someone who treated me with respect and kindness because I deserved better than her son. Last week, Dave texted me apologizing for lying to me about Thomas being in the hospital. He said he felt bad about going along with the prank, but that Thomas had pressured him into it. He said Thomas told him it would only last a few hours and that I would think it was funny once I found out the truth. Dave said that after Thomas left my apartment that night, he went back to their place and spent hours complaining about how I had ruined his prank and made him look bad in front of his family. Dave said Thomas kept saying I was too emotional and couldn't take a joke. Dave said he started to realize that Thomas didn't seem to care at all about how much he had hurt me. I haven't heard from Thomas since that day he came to my apartment and Mrs. Chen made him leave. His social media posts make it look like he's having a great time going out with his coworkers, and he hasn't mentioned me at all. I guess he moved on pretty quickly. Some of my friends think I should try to work things out with Thomas. They say relationships require forgiveness and that everyone makes mistakes. They think the prank was mean, but not worth ending a 2-year relationship over. But I keep thinking about how he listened to me crying and thought it was entertainment for his coworkers. I'm not sure what comes next, but I know I can't go back to how things were before. Too much has happened, and I've learned too much about who Thomas really is when no one is watching. Update 2. I thought I was done with this whole situation, but apparently Thomas wasn't done with me. About 3 weeks ago, things became strange again, and I'm still trying to process everything that happened. I had been doing pretty well since my last update. I was focusing on work and spending time with friends and family. I wasn't really dating anyone, but I wasn't ready for that anyway. I felt like I was moving forward and putting the entire Thomas situation behind me. Then I received a call from an unknown number. When I answered, it was a woman who said her name was Jessica and that she was Thomas's girlfriend. She said she had gotten my number from Thomas's phone and wanted to talk to me about him. I was confused because as far as I knew, Thomas and I had broken up and he was single. Jessica explained that she and Thomas had been dating for about 6 weeks. She said they met at a bar and had been seeing each other regularly since then. She said Thomas had told her he was single and had been for several months. Jessica said she had found my contact information in Thomas's phone along with many text messages he had saved from when we were together. She said some of the messages were recent, from after Thomas and I had supposedly broken up. She wanted to know if Thomas and I were still involved. I told Jessica that Thomas and I had broken up months ago and that I hadn't spoken to him since the day he came to my apartment and wouldn't leave. I explained about the prank and how our relationship ended. Jessica was quiet for a while and then said she needed to tell me something. Jessica said that Thomas had been telling people a completely different story about why we broke up. According to Thomas, I had cheated on him with my neighbor and then tried to cover it up by making up a story about him faking a car accident. He told people that I was a liar and that I had mental health issues that made me create drama and false accusations. Jessica said Thomas had been using our breakup story as a way to get sympathy from women he was trying to date. He would tell them about his crazy ex-girlfriend who made up lies about him and how hard it was for him to trust again. Jessica said she had felt sorry for him, and that's partly why she started dating him. But Jessica said something seemed off about Thomas's story from the beginning. She said the details kept changing and some parts didn't make sense. She said Thomas couldn't keep his story straight about when things happened or what exactly I had done wrong. Then Jessica found out about the prank from a mutual friend who knew one of Thomas's coworkers. The friend mentioned the elaborate joke Thomas and his coworkers had played on his girlfriend and how it backfired when she didn't think it was funny. Jessica realized that Thomas had been lying to her about everything. Jessica said she confronted Thomas about the prank, and he initially denied it. When she told him she had already heard the story from someone else, he admitted it was true, but said I had overreacted and made a big deal out of nothing. He said the prank was harmless and that I was too sensitive to handle dating someone with a sense of humor. Jessica asked Thomas why he had lied to her about what really happened between us. Thomas said he didn't think she would understand the situation and that it was easier to tell her I was crazy than to explain the whole complicated story. He said all his ex-girlfriends were dramatic and that women just didn't get a sense of humor. Jessica said that's when she realized Thomas wasn't just a liar, but that he probably had some serious issues with how he viewed women in general. She said she started paying attention to how he talked about other women and noticed he always had something negative to say about every woman in his life. Jessica decided to break up with Thomas, but before she did, she wanted to reach out to me. She said she felt like I deserved to know that Thomas was spreading lies about me and ruining my reputation. She also wanted to apologize for believing his story initially and for not questioning it more. I thanked Jessica for calling me and for being honest about what Thomas had been saying. I asked her if she knew how many people he had told his fake story to. She said he had told his coworkers, his family, and several women he had met through dating apps. She said he seemed to enjoy telling the story and got a lot of attention and sympathy from it. Jessica said she was planning to tell Thomas's coworkers the truth about what really happened. She said some of them had heard both versions of the story and were starting to realize that Thomas was lying about something. She said one of the coworkers had already started distancing himself from Thomas because he was uncomfortable with how Thomas talked about women. After Jessica and I hung up, I felt sick to my stomach. I realized that Thomas had spent months telling people I was a liar and a cheater. I wondered how many people believed his story and how many people thought I was the kind of person who would make up something as serious as a fake car accident. I decided to call Sarah, Thomas's mom, and tell her what Jessica had told me. Sarah was upset but not surprised. She said Thomas had been telling her a different version of events too. He had told his family that I was mentally unstable and had made up the prank story to make him look bad after I got caught cheating. Sarah said she never believed Thomas's story because it didn't match what I had told her, and because she knew I wasn't the type of person to lie about something so serious. She said she had tried to get Thomas to tell her the truth, but he stuck to his story even when she confronted him with evidence that he was lying. Sarah said she was going to have another conversation with Thomas about his behavior. She said she was tired of him lying and manipulating people, and that she was considering cutting off all financial support until he got help for his problems. A few days after Jessica called me, I heard from Dave again. He said Thomas had been telling people at their apartment complex that I was stalking him and trying to cause problems in his new relationship. Dave said Thomas claimed I had called Jessica pretending to be concerned about her safety, when really I was just jealous and trying to break them up. Dave said he was tired of Thomas's lies and that he was looking for a new roommate. He said, living with Thomas had become unbearable because Thomas was constantly complaining about women and blaming other people for his problems. Dave said Thomas never took responsibility for anything and always found a way to make himself the victim. I realized that Thomas was never going to stop lying about me or take responsibility for what he did. He was going to keep telling his story to anyone who would listen and making me out to be the villain. I decided I needed to protect myself and my reputation from any further damage. I started reaching out to mutual friends and acquaintances to set the record straight about what really happened between Thomas and me. Most people were shocked to learn the truth, and several said they had suspected Thomas was lying because his story never quite added up. I also decided to document everything that had happened in case Thomas escalated his behavior or tried to cause more problems for me in the future. I saved all the text messages, recorded phone calls where it was legal to do so, and wrote down detailed accounts of every interaction. I'm still angry that Thomas has been lying about me for months and that so many people believed his story without questioning it, but I'm also relieved to finally know the truth about what he's been saying and to have the chance to defend myself. Update 3. This will be my final update on this situation, because I think I finally reached the end of the Thomas drama. The past month and a half has been a roller coaster, but I'm in a much better place now. After my last update, I continued reaching out to people who had heard Thomas's version of events. I was surprised by how many mutual friends and acquaintances had been told some variation of his story about me being a cheater and a liar. Most people were understanding when I explained what really happened, and several apologized for believing Thomas without hearing my side. But there were a few people who seemed to prefer Thomas's version of events. They said that both stories couldn't be true, and that someone was lying. But they thought Thomas was more credible because he seemed less emotional about the whole thing. These were mostly Thomas's closer friends, and some of his co-workers who had been involved in the original prank. I realized I wasn't going to convince everyone, and that some people would always believe Thomas no matter what evidence I presented. I decided to focus on the people who mattered most to me, and let the others think whatever they wanted to think. About 3 weeks ago, Sarah called me with some news about Thomas. She said she had followed through on her threat to cut off his financial support after he continued lying about me and refused to take responsibility for his actions. She stopped paying his car insurance and told him he needed to start paying back his student loans immediately. Thomas apparently didn't take this well. Sarah said he called her screaming and accusing her of choosing me over her own son. He said I had manipulated her into turning against him and that she was betraying her family for a girl he used to date. Sarah said Thomas told her she would regret her decision and that he wouldn't forget what she had done. Sarah said Thomas's brother Tom had also gotten involved after hearing about everything that happened. Tom was disgusted by Thomas's behavior and told him he was embarrassed to be related to him. Tom said the prank was cruel and that lying about me afterward was even worse. He said Thomas needed to grow up and start taking responsibility for his actions. Thomas cut off contact with most of his family after that conversation. Sarah said he blocked her phone number and refused to respond to any attempts at communication. She said she was heartbroken, but that she couldn't continue enabling his behavior by pretending it was acceptable. Around the same time, Jessica reached out to me again. She said she had followed through on her plan to tell Thomas's co-workers the truth about what happened between us. She said most of them were shocked to learn that Thomas had been lying and that several of them felt bad for participating in the original prank. Jessica said one of the co-workers admitted that they had all known the prank was mean-spirited, but they went along with it because Thomas insisted I would think it was funny.